Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. And Daniel, good to see you this morning.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well,
Fantastic.
And I'm very fascinated with our guest today. We have a special guest, and he knows a lot about what's going on in Syria, and that's the subject of the day and the subject of the past week. So I'm very pleased with that. Now, our special guest is a diplomat, British diplomat, and he was a ambassador to Bahrain between 2009 and 2003, but then he became the ambassador in Syria from 2003-06. So he knows the regions, he knows the territory, he's keeping up with what's going on. It's Ambassador Peter Ford. Ambassador, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul. It's an honor.
Very good, and we do have some questions here for you because you're the expert, and we're always trying to learn. But you know, first off, there's activity going on right now about, most of the story's been out that the inspectors couldn't go in to prove there was nothing going on. They hurried up and did the bombing, you know, that sort of thing. Now the inspectors are trying to get back in, and that's the OPCW, but they're not doing well. They're not there yet unless they got in there in the last few minutes. And I've heard a couple stories for that. One is that the UN didn't give them the approval to go in. And then again, a Russian ambassador or a Russian figure said, no, it's the jihadists that are keeping them out. Can you sort of sort that out for me? I'm not quite sure why they're not getting in there. I know there's some people who don't want them in there to find the truth, but it just seems confusing to me who's really keeping them out, since theoretically that area is controlled by the Syrian government.
Well, I think it's probably some jihadis who had gone to ground who are firing off a few shots. It only takes a couple of shots to spook the UN. I speak as a former UN official because when I retired from the diplomatic service, I joined the UN in the Middle East and was an official based in Amman, just down the road from Damascus, for 8 years. And I know from experience, I used to go to dangerous places like Gaza. I know that the UN is very meticulous about the safety of its staff. They require new security assessments every time there's a new development, like a bombing. This is part of the reason for the delay. The UN has needed to make constant reassessments, but then shots have been fired. They can really only have come from the jihadi side. And you can see what the objective is. It's to cause delay because this will tend to devalue the findings of the mission. People like my own government will say, oh, so many days have passed, the evidence has got degraded, their verdict can be discounted. This is very likely what is happening. Or the jihadi groups themselves, off their own bat, have decided that it's in their interest to prevent the truth emerging.
Right, and Daniel has a question, a comment.
Yeah, Ambassador Ford, you've been a thorn in the side of the establishment, not only yours over there, but ours here, by challenging the dominant narrative. And you know, we're very interested on this program in the media and how the mainstream media behaves. And one thing I find absolutely fascinating is, to me it seems, to most people it seems, that the role of the media in a free society is to question the pronouncements of their governments. But in this case, we see in the Times over there, in many other publications, and over here, you're demonized for questioning the government's official pronouncements. They call you all sorts of terrible names for daring to question your government. Isn't that the media's job, to question the government?
Target me, it shows that I'm being effective. But this is quite worrying that even respectable institutions like the BBC have acted as cheerleaders in the rush to war. Of course, it was rather similar back before the rush to war over Iraq. There weren't many brave voices in the mainstream media, but this time it's been even more blatant. I've had to struggle to force myself onto the BBC, and I did it by going to some of the small radio stations like Radio Scotland, kicking up a fuss and causing the recordings of the program to go viral.
Yes, we saw that. Didn't one BBC presenter say to you just yesterday something about, let's put these facts aside for a few minutes? Wasn't there a quote like this somewhere? I think I saw. Forget the facts.
Yeah, well, that's my shtick. I'm not into theories. I deal in facts. And these have been conspicuously missing in the run-up to latest episode and continue to be missing. For example, how often do you see it reported in most of the media that this mission by the international experts was requested not by America, not by my government, not by France, as you might have expected if they had wanted to get to the bottom of it. No, it was by the government of Syria and the government of Russia. I think this tells us something about who is keen to get to the real truth.
Yeah, that seems to be that would wake them up, but sometimes logic doesn't prevail. I did have a question about, there was a report also today about some canisters and bombs found that had some chlorine in, and smoke bombs, and they said that they were from either Great Britain and or Germany. Is that significant at all in your analysis?
There are various possibilities. No, it's not significant because the jihadis are extremely clever. It's quite within their capability to lay a false trail, to mislead the inspectors. In fact, I'd be very surprised if they hadn't. I have heard that the inspectors have received tip-offs about where there are graves of victims, and I dare say if they go to these sites, they will find bodies which have been contaminated by the jihadis trying to mislead the inspectors. So a lot of chaff and disinformation and false and red herrings are being thrown up.
Mr. Ambassador, I would like to read to you a tweet that just came out before we started the show, and it's from Representative Thomas Massey, who's a U.S. representative from Kentucky. He's also on the board of our Ron Paul Institute, so he's obviously a very intelligent and clear-thinking individual, but we have a lot of admiration. But let me just read you this and maybe have you react to it if you don't mind. He had obviously just come from a briefing from the executive branch. He said, in a briefing to Congress, the Director of National Intelligence, the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of State provided zero real evidence. They referenced information circulating online, which means either they chose not to provide proof to Congress or they don't have conclusive proof that Assad carried out the gas attack. Either way, not good. Very interesting. It seems like some holes are starting to be poked into the narrative.
That doesn't surprise me in the least. Mattis, General Mattis, the day before the launching of the strike, was telling Congress, look guys, the only evidence we have so far is press reports and social media. What? What? You're going to war on gossip? Wow, unbelievable, unbelievable. And then miraculously, some magic bullet of intelligence arrives that we still haven't seen. We have no inkling whatever. The closest that Mrs. May has got to delivering some of this intelligence is that, well, we have evidence that there was a helicopter and it dropped a barrel bomb. Come on, come on. It was an open knowledge that there was bombing going on because the jihadis hadn't surrendered. Yeah, but ordinary bombing. None of the evidence that has been put forward to date, none of the videos, none of the statements by governments is inconsistent with the very likely fact that there was conventional bombing going on. Folks got smoke inhalation. They went to this underground clinic, and that's where the white helmets staged the incident. The white helmets, who, as you probably know, are the jihadi auxiliaries who help in beheadings, and when they're not helping in beheadings, they are helping to produce fake videos. These hoaxers shouted gas, gas, to produce panic. Everybody went into gas mode. They got hold of hoses, I think, and shoved inhalers at kids. When you look again at the videos, I think you can see the reality of what happened, but we've been primed by having it repeated over and over again that this is gas attack, this is gas attack. We've been primed. Our brains can't adjust to the fact that there might be another explanation, but when you look at the videos, you will see it can all be explained in terms of an ordinary bomb causing smoke inhalation in some people, and some of the kids have even been dragged in off the street, and now some of them are even being interviewed on TV. We recognize their faces. One boy in particular has been on TV, Syrian TV today, saying they enticed us in with cookies and dates, and then they sprayed us with water. We didn't know what the hell was going on.
Right. Ambassador, you recall, and I recall very clearly what went on leading up to the Iraq War, and you were an ambassador in Bahrain. Now, there are some comparisons here that can be made, but it took a long time for those of us back then arguing the case that it was unnecessary and didn't believe the lies that led up to that war. And yet today, most people believe that war was based on lies and it was a bad war and all this. But now they're doing this again. Do you think we're doing a better job at revealing the truth to the general public in these last couple weeks, or do you think we're just about as just as stymied as we were back in Iraq, and that someday, oh yeah, they're 10 years from now, they say, oh, those guys were right, it was all fake? Well, how do you compare the two? Do you think we're doing a better job in revealing the truth than we were able to back leading up to the Iraq War?
Well, I think there's one big difference, that the elites continue to take the Kool-Aid, but the ordinary people are smarter. And ordinary people in Britain, and I suspect America, remember Iraq, partly because I keep reminding them. They remember what we called in England the dodgy dossier, of faked evidence. This time we haven't even had a dodgy dossier. Nothing. So I think the elites are beginning to panic, because now we have more than in those days of the Iraq War. We've got internet, social media. The real truth gets around, and people are asking more questions. This is one difference, but most of the mainstream media, as well as our governments, are still conducting a very savage disinformation war, and they must be terrified that the truth will come out, because imagine if we're right, the governments have been lying to us in a major way, an issue of war and peace. Either that, or they have been incredibly naive. Either way, I think President Trump has been grossly misled by his advisors. How could they not tell him that the white helmets are these guys who help at beheadings? How could they tell him that these are credible witnesses? This is like saying that, the story of Little Red Riding Hood. This is like saying that the wolf is a trusted source. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Laughable. It would be laughable if it were not so dreadfully tragic. Right. And the really awful thing is that we're just setting ourselves up for an action replay a few months down the pipe, which really is going to be very, very tragic, because we're leaving ourselves no exit route.
Daniel.
Ambassador, you have an advantage over probably 80 or 90% of our own diplomatic corps, which is that you actually speak the language of the countries that you follow. You're fluent in Arabic, as I understand, so you have a deeper and richer sense of what's happening there. Now, if we can back up a little bit, I'd like to look back. You were the ambassador in Syria in 2006. And we know from a few sources, we know, for example, from WikiLeaks, that's around the time that the cable was sent from the U.S. Embassy in Damascus back to Main State in Washington, outlining the different ways of overthrowing the Assad government back in 2006. I remember, because I was on Capitol Hill working for Dr. Paul, that the Syrian government at that time was trying to make a bit of a charm offensive to open the door with the U.S. They had a few meetings with us in our office and elsewhere. I'm wondering, as an ambassador there in 2006, did you see kind of a shift in U.S. policy toward regime change? Could you tell there was a shift, that things were changing as far back as that?
Yes, I think so. When I first arrived in Damascus in 2003, the honeymoon with Assad really was underway. I arrived 1 month after Assad had been having tea in Buckingham Palace with Her Majesty the Queen. So he was in good odor at that time. Although even then there was some reticence on the part of the United States. But as the months and the years passed, it became clearer and clearer that the United States had not come off the agenda of regime change. And indeed, it was being stated openly in around 2005 that Assad was on the hit list, that once they removed Saddam, Assad was going to be next. And it was for this reason that Assad tried to make things difficult for the United States in Iraq by allowing the passage through his territory of jihadis coming up mainly from Jordan. This was a very dangerous ploy. It was something with the devil, but he saw it as self-preservation, because if the US forces didn't get bogged down in Iraq, he knew that he was next on the list.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador, the Italians decided not to participate in the bombing, which I guess wasn't too big a surprise, at least for me. But the fact that the submarine that participated, the U.S. submarine, is not permitted to go back to port in Italy, that, I don't know how much that has significance, but what other country might be in that category of just saying, well, we'd like you to participate, but we flat out don't want to participate? Any other surprises to you of somebody else that may have taken a different position than the United States and Britain?
I think Turkey tried to have it both ways. I'm not sure if at the end of the day they allowed use of the big US bases in Turkey. Turkey was blowing hot and cold. But the important thing here is that the tripartite aggressors, as they're called in the region, Britain, France, and America, did not have UN backing. Now, it will be objected that Russia would have blocked that in the Security Council, but there is an alternative procedure called Uniting for Peace, whereby states in a grave situation can go to the General Assembly and just get a majority there. We didn't even try for that. We knew that we wouldn't be persuasive, and we were in a rush. We were in a rush to carry out this illegal attack before the OPCW, International Chemical Inspectors, could get there and very likely attest to the fact that there was no evidence.
Well, I guess, Mr. Ambassador, we'll probably, in a way, almost finish where we should have started, because, you really caught my attention. Well, of course, I've been following you for a long time, but the Scottish BBC interview, radio interview, was such a classic, and you uttered the great line that even a child could understand this. The illogic of Assad using gas at that particular point. So I was wondering maybe if you could go back to that and present that argument that you made, why it is so absolutely illogical. Maybe you're speaking to the converted in our audience, but if you could do that and then say a little prediction of where you think we go from here.
Yeah, well, my government keeps trying, and the US administration keep trying to say that Assad is just a monster and he likes gassing little children for the hell of it. That's about the logic of what they're saying, because it ignores the simple fact that even a child would appreciate that he's winning the war. He has victory in sight. He had recovered 95% of the territory near Damascus, the eastern Ghouta. He had the town of Douma in the palm of his hand. 3,000 jihadis had left just the day before. All that was left was a haggle about the money. The jihadis wanted to take with them $900 million of their loot. They weren't fighting, they were just haggling and lobbing some mortars into government-held Damascus. So he had absolutely no motive. And to say that it was militarily significant to kill a few hundred civilians, and anyway, there's no evidence that even more than 20 were involved in the incident. But you have to have cabbage for brains to believe this nonsense. This is total horse feathers.
Well, you know what somebody else suggested, and it's a relative of mine, he says the only way he could do that is if he was the stupidest dictator on the whole planet, and I don't think he qualifies for that. But anyway, Ambassador, we're going to have to go, but I really want to thank you for coming on. Deeply appreciate it. I know the audience is going to really enjoy the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Very good, and I want to address our audience for a second, and that is to remind you to come back soon to the Ron Paul Liberty Report.